History of Papua New Guinea. Published December the 9th, 2017. Special characters are denoted as follows. And. Beginning and ending single or double quotations. And. Left and right parentheses. 3 consecutive periods. The prehistory of Papua New Guinea can be traced back to about 60,000 years ago when people first migrated towards the Australian continent. The written history began when European navigators first sighted New Guinea in the early part of the 16th century. Part 1. Archaeology. Archaeological evidence indicates that humans arrived on New Guinea perhaps 60,000 years ago, although this is under debate. They came probably by sea from Southeast Asia during an Ice Age period when the sea was lower and distances between islands shorter. Although the first arrivals were hunters and gatherers, early evidence shows that people managed the forest environment to provide food. There also are indications of Neolithic gardening having been practiced at Côte at the same time that agriculture was developing in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Today's staples, sweet potatoes and pigs, were later arrivals, but shellfish and fish have long been mainstays of coastal dwellers' diets. Recent archaeological research suggests that 50,000 years ago people may have occupied sites in the highlands at altitudes of up to 2,000 meters. 6,600 feet. Rather than being restricted to warmer coastal areas. Part 2. European contact. When Europeans first arrived, inhabitants of New Guinea and nearby islands, whose technologies included bone, wood, and stone tools, had a productive agricultural system. They traded along the coast, mainly in pottery, shell ornaments and foodstuffs, and in the interior, exchanging forest products for shells and other sea products. The first known Europeans to sight New Guinea were probably the Portuguese and Spanish navigators sailing in the South Pacific in the early part of the 16th century. In 1526 to 1527 the Portuguese explorer Jorge de Menezes accidentally came upon the principal island and is credited with naming it Papua, after a Malay word for the frizzled quality of Melanesian people's hair. The Spaniard Inigo Ortiz de Retes applied the term New Guinea to the island in 1545 because of a perceived resemblance between the island's inhabitants and those found on the African Guinea coast. Although European navigators visited the islands and explored their coastlines thereafter, European researchers knew little of the inhabitants until the 1870s, when Russian anthropologist Nikolai Mikhlouk made a number of expeditions to New Guinea, spending several years living among native tribes, and described their way of life in a comprehensive treatise. Part 3. Territory of Papua. In 1883, the colony of Queensland tried to annex the southern half of eastern New Guinea, but the British government did not approve. However, when Germany began settlements in the north, the British Protectorate was proclaimed in 1884 over the southern coast of New Guinea and its adjacent islands. The Protectorate, called British New Guinea, was annexed outright on the 4th of September 1888. The possession was placed under the authority of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1902. Following the passage of the Papua Act in 1905, British New Guinea became the Territory of Papua, and formal Australian administration began in 1906, although Papua remained under their control, a British possession, until the independence of Papua New Guinea in 1975. There was little economic activity in Papua. Australia administered it separately under the Papua Act until it was invaded by the Empire of Japan in 1941 and civil administration suspended. During the Pacific War, Papua was governed by an Australian military administration from Port Moresby, where General Douglas MacArthur occasionally made his headquarters. Part 4. German New Guinea. With Europe's growing desire for coconut oil, Godefroy's of Hamburg, the largest trading firm in the Pacific, began trading for copra in the New Guinea Islands. In 1884, the German Empire formally took possession of the northeast quarter of the island and put its administration in the hands of a chartered trading company formed for the purpose, the German New Guinea Company. In the charter granted to this company by the German imperial government in May 1885, it was given the power to exercise sovereign rights over the territory and other unoccupied lands in the name of the government, and the ability to negotiate directly with the native inhabitants. Relationships with foreign powers were retained as the preserve of the German government. The New Guinea Company paid for the local governmental institutions directly, in return for the concessions which had been awarded to it. In 1899, the German imperial government assumed direct control of the territory, thereafter known as German New Guinea. New Guinea was basically a business venture. Thousands of local workers were hired as cheap labor on cocoa and copra plantations. In 1899, the German government took control of the colony from the New Guinea Company of Berlin. Education was in the hands of missionaries. In 1914, when the First World War broke out, Australia seized the German colony. The plantations were given to Australian war veterans, and in 1921 the League of Nations gave Australia a trusteeship over New Guinea. The plantations and gold mining generated a degree of prosperity. Part 5. Territory of New Guinea. The Commonwealth of Australia assumed a mandate from the League of Nations for governing the former German territory of New Guinea in 1920. It was administered under this mandate until the Japanese invasion in December 1941 brought about the suspension of Australian civil administration. Much of the territory of New Guinea, including the islands of Bougainville and New Britain, was occupied by Japanese forces before being recaptured by Australian and American forces during the final months of the war. See New Guinea Campaign. Part 6. Exploration of mandated territory of New Guinea. Part 6. Exploration of mandated territory of New Guinea. Chapter 1. Akmana Expedition 1929–1930. The exploration of Papua New Guinea has been a continuing process, even today. October 2017. New groups of people occasionally are still contacted. Not until recent years has New Guinea's exploration been planned. Much of it has been the work of miners, labor recruiters, missionaries, adventurers, with different objects in mind. Many of these people have been doers, not recorders of facts, with the result that our knowledge of the territory's exploration has not kept pace with the exploration itself. An exception is the record of the Akmana Gold Prospecting Company's field party, which carried out 2 expeditions from September to December 1929 and from mid-February to the end of June 1930. They journeyed on the Banyanda, a cruiser of 12 meters, 38 feet, from Madang up the coast to the mouth of the Sepik River, traveling along that river to Marienburg and Moim, then along the Karasameri River to the Kariwai River and on to the Erubundia River and Yemas, after which it was necessary to transport their stores and equipment by pinnace, canoe and ultimately on foot to their mountain base on the upper Erubundia River. During their first expedition, the Akmana field party prospected the tributaries of the Erubundio and then trekked across the spur of the central mountain range to sample the upper Kariwai River. Retracing their steps to the Erubundio, they then headed out across another spur of the central mountain range to the junction of the Uart River with the Jimmy and Bay Rivers, again without finding gold in sufficient quantity. Returning to Madang at the end of December 1929, several of the party went back to Sydney to obtain instructions from the Akmana Gold Prospecting Company. In mid-February 1930, the second expedition quickly returned to their mountain base and on across the mountains to the junction of the Uart with the Bayer and Jimmy rivers. They prospected south along the Bayer River to its junction with the Marimuni and Tawa rivers, where they established a palisaded forward camp naming the place Akmana Junction. From this base they prospected along the Marimuni River and its tributaries, again without success. Finally they prospected the Tawa River south past the tributary which flows to Ipai, once more without success, and on the advice of mining engineer Seal, it was decided there was nothing to justify further exploration. They had not progressed to any country on the southern watershed through which the early explorers and prospectors travelled to the Hagan Range and Wabag. The party returned to Madang, sailing for Sydney on the 3rd of July 1930. After leading the first expedition, Sam Freeman did not return and Reg Beasley became party leader of the second expedition, with Ponty Seal mining engineer, Bill McGregor and Beasley prospectors and recruiters, and Ernie Shepherd in charge of transport and supplies, prospecting when opportunity arose. They had all served overseas during World War I with the IF on the Western Front, in Egypt and the Levant, and had previously been to New Guinea. In 1926 Freeman was near Marienburg with Orm Milder drilling for oil. Shepherd was with Dr. Wade and R.J. Winters on their geological survey of an oil lease of 26,000 square kilometers. 10,000 square miles. In the Boga and Nubio-Taramu region and up the Sepik River to Kubka 100 kilometers. 60 miles. Above Ambunto, Beasley was drilling test sites for oil with Matahauer in the lower Sepik, and he and McGregor recruited labor on the Sepik and explored grass country to Wewak. Beasley also prospected the Arabundio for gold, and on his promising report to Freeman, Akmana gold prospecting Koi was floated in 1928. The Akmana gold prospecting field party made contact with many peoples they called grass country people, headhunters, pygmies, Wigmen, Kanakas, Pumoni. These contacts were often with the help of Dribo/Daribu, a leader and spokesman of the Wigmen, a most intelligent man of goodwill, with a quiet authority that brought forth friendly cooperation. We made a peaceful entry into this new country, establishing a reputation for fair trade and decent behavior. But gold was our interest, and we had traced the rivers and tributaries as far as practicable where conditions and results justified the effort, and found nothing worthwhile. In the many years since, there have been quite a few reports of prospecting parties in the area, but nothing of note has been reported, so we did not leave much behind, it seems. Members of the Akmana party donated wigs they had brought back to various museums. 2 of them went to the Australian Museum, Sydney. From Beasley and Shepherd. Current records at the Australian Museum show that Beasley's wig, described as a cap composed of human hair from the headwaters of the Uat River, Central Mountains, mandated territory of NG, was lodged on the 31st of January 1930, presumably on his quick visit to Sydney after the first expedition. Shepherd presented another wig to Father Kirschbaum, who wanted to send it to Germany. The wigs at the Australian Museum were later confused with some brought out of the Highlands 10 years afterwards by Jim Taylor during his Hagan Sepik patrol, and wrongly attributed to him when put on display. Seal presented 2 wigs to the National Museum, Canberra in 1930. Part 7, World War II. Shortly after the start of the Pacific War, the island of New Guinea was invaded by the Japanese. Most of West Papua, at that time known as Dutch New Guinea, was occupied, as were large parts of the territory of New Guinea. The former German New Guinea, which was also under Australian rule after World War I. But Papua was protected to a large extent by its southern location and the near impassable O'In-Stanley Ranges to the north. The New Guinea campaign opened with the battles for New Britain and New Ireland in the territory of New Guinea in 1942. Rabaul, the capital of the territory, was overwhelmed on 22nd to the 23rd of January and was established as a major Japanese base from whence they landed on mainland New Guinea and advanced towards Port Moresby and Australia. Having had their initial effort to capture Port Moresby by a seaborne invasion disrupted by the US Navy in the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Japanese attempted a landward invasion from the north via the Kokoda Trail. From July 1942, a few Australian reserve battalions, many of them very young and untrained, fought a stubborn rearguard action against a Japanese advance along the Kokoda Track towards Port Moresby over the rugged Owen Stanley Ranges. Local Papuans, called Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels by the Australians, assisted and escorted injured Australian troops down the Kokoda Trail. The militia, worn out and severely depleted by casualties, were relieved in late August by regular troops from the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, returning from action in the Mediterranean theatre. The Japanese were driven back. The bitter Battle of Bunagona followed, in which Australian and United States forces attacked the main Japanese beachheads in New Guinea, at Buna, Sanananda and Gona. Facing tropical disease, difficult terrain and well-constructed Japanese defences, the Allies only secured victory with heavy casualties. In early September 1942, Japanese Marines attacked a strategic Royal Australian Air Force base at Milne Bay, near the eastern tip of Papua. They were beaten back by the Australian Army, and the Battle of Milne Bay is remembered as the first outright defeat on Japanese land forces during World War II. The offensives in Papua and New Guinea of 1943–44 were the single largest series of connected operations ever mounted by the Australian Armed Forces. The Supreme Commander of Operations was the United States General Douglas MacArthur, with Australian General Thomas Blamey taking a direct role in planning and operations, being essentially directed by staff at New Guinea Force Headquarters in Port Moresby. Bitter fighting continued in New Guinea between the largely Australian force and the Japanese 18th Army based in New Guinea until the Japanese surrender in 1945. The New Guinea campaign was a major campaign of the Pacific War. In all, some 200,000 Japanese soldiers, sailors and airmen died during the campaign against approximately 7,000 Australian and 7,000 American service personnel. Part 8. The Territory of Papua and New Guinea. Following the surrender of the Japanese in 1945, civil administration of Papua as well as New Guinea was restored, and under the Papua New Guinea Provisional Administration Act 1945–46. Papua and New Guinea were combined in an administrative union. The Papua and New Guinea Act 1949 formally approved the placing of New Guinea under the international trusteeship system and confirmed the administrative union under the title of the Territory of Papua and New Guinea. The act provided for a legislative council, established in 1951, a judicial organization, a public service, and a system of local government, with Sir Donald Cleland as administrator. Cleland remained in the position till his retirement in 1967, then remaining in Port Moresby until his death in 1975. The House of Assembly of Papua and New Guinea replaced the Legislative Council in 1963, and after elections on the 15th of February, opened on the 8th of June 1964. In 1972, the name of the territory was changed to Papua New Guinea. Australia's change of policy towards Papua New Guinea largely commenced with the invitation from the Australian government to the World Bank to send a mission to the territory to advise on measures to be taken towards its economic development and political preparation. The mission's report, The Economic Development of the Territory of Papua New Guinea, published in 1964, set out the framework upon which much of later economic policy, up to and beyond independence, proceeded. Part 9. Independence. Elections in 1972 resulted in a formation of a ministry headed by Chief Minister Michael Somare, who pledged to lead the country to self-government and then to independence. Papua New Guinea became self-governing on the 1st of December 1973 and achieved independence on the 16th of September 1975. The country joined the United Nations (UN) on the 10th of October 1975 by way of Security Council Resolution 375 and General Assembly Resolution 3368. The 1977 national elections confirmed Michael Somare as Prime Minister at the head of a coalition led by the Pangu Party. However, His government lost a vote of confidence in 1980 and was replaced by a new cabinet headed by Sir Julius Chan as Prime Minister. The 1982 elections increased Panga's plurality, and Parliament again chose Somare as Prime Minister. In November 1985, the Somare government lost another vote of no confidence, and the parliamentary majority elected Payas Wingti, at the head of a five-party coalition, as Prime Minister. A coalition, headed by Wingti, was victorious in very close elections in July 1987. In July 1988, a no-confidence vote toppled Wingti and brought to power Abin Amaliu, who a few weeks earlier had replaced Somare as leader of the Pangu party. Such reversals of fortune and a revolving door succession of prime ministers continue to characterize Papua New Guinea's national politics. A plethora of political parties, coalition governments, shifting party loyalties and motions of no confidence in the leadership all lend an air of instability to political proceedings. Under legislation intended to enhance stability, new governments remain immune from no-confidence votes for the first 18 months of their incumbency. A 9-year secessionist revolt on the island of Bougainville claimed some 20,000 lives. The rebellion began in early 1989, active hostilities ended with a truce in October 1997 and a permanent ceasefire was signed in April 1998. A peace agreement between the government and ex-combatants was signed in August 2001. A regional peace monitoring force and a UN observer mission monitors the government and provincial leaders who have established an interim administration and are working toward complete surrender of weapons, the election of a provincial government and an eventual referendum on independence. Although close relations have been maintained since peaceful independence and Australia remains the largest bilateral aid donor to Papua New Guinea, relations with Australia have recently shown signs of strain. While on an official visit in March 2005, the PNG Prime Minister, Michael Somare, was asked to submit to a security check and remove his shoes upon arriving at the airport in Brisbane. Despite demands from the PNG government that Australia apologise, the latter refused. Additionally, problems have arisen with regard to Australia's latest aid package for the country. Valued at $760 million, the program was to tackle crime and corruption in PNG by sending 200 Australian police to Port Moresby and installing 40 Australian officials within the national bureaucracy. However, after the first detachment of police arrived, Papua New Guinea's High Court ruled that the arrangement was unconstitutional, and the police returned home. A new arrangement, by which only 30 officers will serve as a training force for the local force, has been described by the Australian Foreign Minister as second best. This recording is a derivative work from Wikipedia. For more information, please visit www.frogcast.org.